Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Day Zero podcast. Welcome to the last episode of the year for the Day Zero podcast, number 22. I'm Spectre, with me is Z. So before we jump into topics, this is going to be our last episode until let me bring up the calendar, the 6th of January. We're taking a little bit of what did I say, the 6th?
6 is what I've got.
Okay, yeah, I confused myself there. So yeah, the 6th of January, we're taking a few weeks, for Christmas and stuff like that's going on, and I'm going to be going to CCC. So yeah, we're just taking a little bit of a break for that, and then we'll be back on the 6th with episode 23. So now that we've got that out of the way, also, I think we should give a shout out to the blog, because we might still put out some content on the blog during that break. So if you guys want to check that out, it's at day0sec.com. And then all of our other links are on there as well. So we'll jump into our first topic, and this one is actually a review that you wanted to do.
Yeah, I want to just kind of quickly bring this up. I mean, this isn't going to be a long review. The book came out back in July, but Real World Bug Hunting, a Field Guide to Web Hacking. I figured since I just kind of finished looking over it, giving it a quick read, I figured I'd share a couple thoughts on it, which is essentially, I mean, this is billed as being, well, as you can see, kind of their description down here is the premier field guide to finding software bugs. I'm not really going to agree with that exactly.
Okay.
It's not a bad resource, but I would definitely kind of see this as being more for I guess what I like about it is the fact that basically it has a bunch of real issues. What it looks at is basically it goes over a bunch of topics. And I apologize for the red box kind of going crazy on screen, if you could see that. Slight technical issue on my end.
Okay.
But I wouldn't buy this if you're wanting to learn the security topics. If you're wanting to do that, I mean, there's Web Application Hacker's Handbook is kind of the classic recommendation for that. Obviously, this is very web focused too. But yeah, so I wouldn't learn from this, but it's a good reference. Basically, it's got sections on various bug classes, and for every class, they've got actual vulnerabilities that have been reported. Generally, the HackerOne links are in there, or some sort of vulnerability report that you can actually read. They do their own write-up of all these different things. It has kind of what you'd expect. Cross-site scripting, SQL injection, CSRF, IDOR, like those normal things. A few things that kind of surprised me are covers OAuth issues. And granted, high level, but like things you actually see kind of in terms of implementing OAuth incorrectly. I was a bit surprised by the response splitting section, just because that is a kind of an older thing that you don't see too often anymore. Server-side request forgery. I mean, it's seen commonly enough, just not necessarily talked about all that often in a lot of the resources. Like, if I recall correctly, like Web Application Hacker's Handbook doesn't cover server-side request forgery. There's race conditions. I mean, basically every section covers the basics of how the issue fundamentally works. So you could learn from it in theory, but it's not the most thorough resource to learn from. I'd see it more as like, hey, I've got an application here. It's got this. I need a quick refresher. Take a look at kind of what it's got. And okay. It includes, it has a token memory corruption section. Just like, the Web Application Hacker's Handbook has that memory corruption section. I kind of wish books just wouldn't, include these token sections like that, where, it's there to kind of check the box, but it's more or less worthless in terms of like real world finding or real world exploits. Just the level it covers doesn't really go anywhere besides, if I recall correctly, basically it's DOS stuff. Like in theory, these things could be exploit, but it doesn't even go that far. It's get the crash, and that's sufficient.
I will say it does seem kind of weird that in the description they say that it's a guide to finding software bugs. I guess technically, like web, it's still software, but usually when you see software bugs, that usually refers to like binary and stuff. So it seems a little weird how it's worded
That's
there.
definitely changing a bit. Especially, AppSec is generally about like that level between binary memory corruption stuff and web. There's a ton of overlap there. The title itself does say, web hacking, not software. So I'm kind of willing to forgive that description as saying software bugs.
Yeah, fair enough. I guess the only other thing is like I kind of wish that there was like, do they have one for binary or is it only web hacking so far?
In terms of like this particular series, real world bug hunting. As
Yeah,
far as I know, it's just this web one, but that is, you look on HackerOne or any of the bug bounty platforms, and that's something I will mention. They actually have a really good list of resources inside of this for learning. Uh, so that is kind of one benefit. They have a lot of things laid out for you to go and do your own research on. But yeah, in terms of binary, in terms of your question, no, it's just the web, but that is the majority of like bounty hunting.
yeah, fair point. Would you say it's worth like $26 asking price? Say it was like a fair buy?
I'd say, definitely take a look at the contents. Amazon does have that look inside, and you can kind of see what it covers. Take a look at the style if it seems like something that would be useful to you. $26 definitely isn't all that much to ask. The content in here, it's all laid out for you. Yeah, it's probably worth it. You can get that value out of it as long as you go into understanding. Like, you're not necessarily learning everything from this book. It's just a quick reference, or hey, you want to see exactly how somebody's pulled this off in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
Because as far as, I mean, like I said, it was more of a review of the book. I've looked over it, but I haven't analyzed every page. As far as I can tell, like, all the exploits they're covering maybe go back 5 years. It doesn't, like, in the response splitting, I'd have expected them to go back like 10 years, but no, they had some recent examples. So there's value in just being able to see that and have it laid out for you.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I'm wondering is like maybe it would be worth compiling a list of like books and stuff like that we find interesting and doing a blog post about that over the holidays. Because I wouldn't even mind getting some recommendations for you for books because I'm going to be going on a long flight to Germany.
I
On the
mean, I
26th.
have
It's going to be like a 12-hour flight, so or probably more than that. So
I've got just pulled it up here, but I mean, I haven't updated this in a significant chunk of time, but I've pulled it up on stream. I've got kind of my recommendation for getting into exploit development, which is just
okay.
kind of like a bunch of resource there. Includes books, includes other stuff too. It starts off just with like getting started with programming, my opinion on languages that you should learn, some RE stuff, which is more about getting like the foundations, and exploit development, starting with web app hackers, and looks like it's just a couple of books here, ending kind of with Bug Hunter's Diary, but yeah, there are definitely some updates I can make. I wrote this, a number of years ago already.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, it's been a few like the last couple of years. There hasn't really been a ton of like new stuff coming out anyway, but it could be worth taking another look at it.
There was though, like there's Practical Binary Analysis. I mean that's a solid book that I'd like to find a way to kind of toss in a recommendation for.
Okay.
Yeah, and that was, I want to say, like last like December 2018, I think. Or
Huh.
I think it was late 2018 that came out. Black Hat Go is coming out soon.
Yeah, I want to look at that one too.
I will answer a quick question out of chat, which is by Halsey Klein. Is there any source to learn WebKit exploitation? The only thing that comes to mind is, and I can't even recall what it is, but I think there's a conference presentation. On a Spectre, you'd probably know more. Are there any?
The best introduction to it, still to this date, even though it's a few years old, is probably Salo's frac paper attacking JavaScript engines. It has a lot of the fundamentals that are used in pretty much every WebKit exploit that you see. It talks about the fake object and leak object primitives, and like that paper pretty much lays out like the fundamentals of every exploit that's used. So even though it is a few years old, it's still very much relevant. So you can see there, October 2016. So, a bit old, but still probably the best introduction to it. This is what I used to get into WebKit exploitation when I was dabbling in it. So this is probably the best resource. But then I think there is also a conference talk like Z is talking about, but I can't remember the title of it. But I'd still say this paper is probably more thorough and probably has a better overview of it.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, if it's a frac paper, generally you're not going to have there aren't a lot of terrible frac papers.
Yeah. So we'll talk about the President's Cup. So this was another last-minute addition. I never even heard of this. So apparently this is a cybersecurity CTF ran by the CISA by Homeland. And it's a CTF that's only available to government employees?
That's it's in response to an executive order.
Okay.
I wasn't too familiar with this either. I had heard it kind of mentioned, saw like a Reddit post however long ago about it, and that was about it. It's actually kind of interesting, but yeah, so the executive order actually states, they shall develop a plan for an annual cybersecurity competition. It even allows for the provision of cash awards of not less than $25,000, like right in the executive order. Is that this will be an annual thing, and the latest date they can get started by is December 31st, 2019. But yeah, so this happened, like the final championship round just happened starting on the 12th, and then it was a 3-day thing until the 15th. There were 2 online qualification rounds that happened in, I want to say, September and October. Okay, September for team. Yeah, September and October. Were some of the different rounds here.
I am a little confused. They say open registration, but that's open registration only to
for
.gov
and .mil employees, yeah.
Okay,
you have to have a .gov or a .mil, and you can't be a contractor.
Okay. That is kind of a weird restriction, why you'd want to just limit it to government employees.
It's the idea is to help bolster kind of the US their positioning globally, and finding, because they do have the individual rounds, finding the talent within wherever they might be in the military or in the government.
Okay.
That said, I did think it was interesting, kind of some of their descriptions here. The qualification rounds are accessed remotely via supported web browser and their television game show style format. So what I imagine with that, and I'm almost confident it's not like this, but have you ever played Jackbox games?
No.
Okay, well basically you join there in your browser. And there's a ton of different games, but actually I'm going to struggle to kind of describe what makes Jackbox somewhat unique. Anyway, I'll just say television game show style format just sounds a little bit weird, but yeah. the final championship round is capture the flag format and a 1-day escape room style competition.
Ooh,
that caught my attention, the escape room style competition. And there's no information. We don't have any information about the results here.
I'm not a surprise. It is government. It's all government employees. Yeah.
Apparently they live streamed it though, because there's watch the live stream now.
Oh, so is there a VOD of it?
No.
Yeah. Well, it does say 2019 President's Cup Cybersecurity Competition video. What's that?
That's their promotional video.
Oh, okay.
It's not worth watching. It's
okay.
But yeah, I don't know. That definitely interests me, including the escape room, because it reminds me a little bit of, I remember when Drugi and I were at RuxCon, they had, I don't know if it was called the Black Bag Challenge. I know in DEF CON, it used to be Gringo Warrior, then it became Black Bag Challenge. I'm not sure what it's called now or if it's still run. But I remember that involved, like, you had to tail this guy and he'd do some dead drops and all the teams would kind of fight to actually be the one to pick up the dead drops. And then after that round, you had to break into a room, break like the safe in the room, and they were monitoring like how loud you were and stuff, and that sort of competition. So combining that, if they have that combined with Capture the Flag, like I love that idea, that style, kind of having the physical red teaming added into a Capture the Flag. And I think Hackfest, up near you actually.
Oh, is it in Toronto?
No, I just meant like over on that side of the country, over in Eastern Canada. Okay, I think it's in. I want to say it's near Montreal, I believe. I want to say Montreal or Quebec City.
Yeah, I mean, I remember hearing about Hackfest. I just don't remember where it was. So
yeah, it's just over on your side of the country compared to me.
Yeah.
Not specifically near you.
Yeah, for those who don't know, I live in like Ontario in Canada, and Z lives like all the way in the middle of nowhere. So that's
all the way over in Saskatchewan.
So yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I like this idea. I think Hackfest, I'm not 100% sure, but I have a friend that's done some of the challenges, and he's mentioned that they've done some physical stuff. So I mean, maybe, but yeah, I mean, I totally love the idea, and that absolutely caught my eye, seeing, escape room style competition.
Yeah. One thing I did see mentioned was something about an incentive being removed before the last round.
Yeah, so I kind of forgot to mention that. That was actually why I wanted to add this in the first place, and then I started looking at, kind of what was actually going on. So I guess what happened is, if you look on the archive.org and you pull this up, there were prizes up to
50,000, I think is what was
that sounds right. For some reason I don't have the archive.org link here.
Okay. I think it was $50,000 for first place.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to pull up the link here, but I believe it was. And then on the 7th, so after those qualification rounds have already happened, or between the 28th and the 7th, or 29th and the 7th. Anyway, on the 7th, I'll see it removed, and I believe on the 29th here, it'll still list it.
Let's see. Because that does seem really, like...
So it wasn't necessarily removed, like, it's not that they're necessarily giving 0, they just removed all the details about the incentive. Yeah, so here they've got, for the team-based one, $50,000 amongst competitors, 25 and 10,000 for third place for the teams.
Okay.
And
but on the page now, it just says...
Yeah, on the page now, it's just DHS is currently collaborating with the Department of Defense on awarding the winners of the competition. Now, this was before the competition happened. It's not like, people won and they're just saying, oh, yeah, we're working on paying them out. This was before the final round. I'm leaning towards the date of the 7th actually being pretty accurate on when it was changed. That's when I think I first heard about it. And some of the comments were saying that, people had already left to go to this, only to have the awards basically removed.
Yeah, that's that. I feel like they should be kind of called out on that, and they should have to explain that, because that does seem really suspicious. Like you said, they did it before the final round, so it's not like.
Yeah, I mean, I have a feeling this is more of a misunderstanding than anything. I mean, my assumption is there's still going to be that prize. I don't know if they're going to drop it. The executive order does state specifically cash awards of not less than $25,000.
Okay, for first place, right? Because
it doesn't specify that. That might even be a combined cash awards.
Okay.
It's not. I did look the executive order, and all it says is allows for the provision of cash awards of not less than 25,000. It's not explicit about it doesn't lay out how that's to be spent. So I'm going to assume that that's a combined thing. It is still troubling that they just removed that right before. Like, you'd imagine they should have had this figured out before they started the competition, before they used that to get people to play in it.
It's government. I don't know if I'm not surprised. You know.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I imagine they're still paying out a prize. We just don't know what it is. And it's really suspicious that they did this, right before the final round.
So, is this going to be a recurring competition that's going to happen again next year?
Yeah, it's supposed to be an annual competition.
Okay, so this is the first year of it, and it's going to be repeating.
Yes.
Okay,
and
cool.
we will basically never be able to participate.
Well, I mean, we could work in government just to try to participate in it. No. But, I mean, I wonder, like, it's funny because there doesn't seem to be much information out about it. Like you were saying, I guess there's no VOD out, but they do live stream it. So
yeah, so I don't know what was actually covered in the live stream.
Yeah, I'm kind of wondering if, like, I wonder if participants are made to sign, like, an NDA or something like that. Because it does seem kind of, like, a bit more secretive than... Like, CTFs are usually pretty open with results and stuff like that,
Yeah, and these might be yet. I mean, it seems like they're at least trying to make it a little bit flashy with their, like, competition video, which has a reasonable production value.
Yeah. Did the president present the award? Anybody watch the live stream? See if Donald Trump presented a President's Cup to the winner?
Yeah, I would make the guess that he didn't.
Yeah, probably not. Would be funny though. But yeah, we can move on from that.
Actually, I'm
yeah.
not entirely sure here. Apparently that VOD is up on there now, though. There's an 8-hour.
Oh, okay.
8-hour YouTube video here of the
That's cool that you
competition.
That
so
why is it posted by CMU, by the way? Was that where it was hosted? I just noticed the channel name that it's.
Yeah, I see that. I don't know.
Okay.
I mean it was hosted in Arlington. I'm not sure where CMU actually is.
Okay.
Either way, the video's there, so there is something. I thought I had looked earlier and it wasn't there, so I don't know if that's a new addition, if they just put that up, or if, it's actually been sitting there for a while, but, hey, there's something if you actually want to check it out.
Yeah, I might check.
Looks like they have commentary on kind of what's going on.
Is that Wireshark? Looks like it, yeah.
Yeah, that's Wireshark.
So, I wonder if it's more network-based than it is, like...
I hope this isn't their escape room. Just like, they put a VR headset on you or something.
Yeah, I hope not too.
Escape the VR.
Escape the simulation. We are the Matrix now.
And yeah, in terms of what they covered, I'm not entirely sure because they do mention that everything could be done like in the browser for the first couple things that doesn't require any special tooling. So that makes me think that might almost be like open source information type stuff that you're looking at initially, although I honestly don't know. Obviously they're using Wireshark here. I've seen obviously there's a PowerShell window open here.
Yeah, I mean, I think after later on in the week or something, I'll glance through it. I might not watch the whole thing because 8 hours is quite long, but I might glance through it and try to see what is covered in it because I'm curious. Just because of the nature of it, like being with government and stuff.
Yeah,
usually
so
it's
am
a
I.
bit
I'm
different
definitely
than
curious.
Other stuff, so I'll probably look through it.
Like I said, I really want to know about this one-day escape room style stuff. But yeah, we can move on.
Yeah. So Google put out a post, better password protections in Chrome. And so apparently the main thing they're doing here is Chrome is going to warn you when your password has been exposed through a breach or something like that. Are they working together with Have I Been Pwned? Is that
I don't know for sure.
Okay, so they don't say.
I don't think so. I believe they've kind of just built this up themselves, so they probably have their own source of the leaks.
Okay.
I never actually looked at that. Something I kind of meant to do because this has kind of come out of earlier technology. Well, not earlier technology, but their It was like they had an extension for it, and then there was in the password checkup in your Google account. That said, this what they're talking about is a little bit unclear.
Okay.
So they have the password checkup. It's in your Google account. If you go, any passwords that you've saved on Chrome, and that's like inside of like using Chrome setup, not using like LastPass or something. Any passwords that you've saved with Chrome and are synced will be on your Google profile. You can go like passwords.google, and from there it'll scan. It'll say like, okay, none of these credentials have been leaked. And actually, I'm going to say pretty definitively they're not using Have I Been Pwned. And that's because they actually do username and password combinations. So I tested it with passwords that should have come up. And they didn't because the username hadn't also been compromised. So that's something that's different from the password API of Have I Been Pwned, where it just turns up if the password's been compromised. It doesn't care about the credential, like the credential pair. It's just the password.
Okay.
That said, what's interesting with this, and I'm trying to see if I can find where I was reading this, but it sounded like, yeah, when you type your credentials into a website, Chrome will now warn you if your username and password have been compromised in a data breach. It sounds like this isn't just saved anymore. This isn't just your saved passwords. This is you log in, Chrome detects you logged in, they check your credentials. Like, it seems...
How much more are we going to give Google?
I'm sure they're using, like, the K-anonymity protocol and stuff. Like, the same thing Have I Been Pwned is done to kind of keep your password secure. Like, I'm sure they're not just making a post request with, like, username, password and getting a true false back. I did actually try and look the network connection a little bit this morning just to see what was going there. I couldn't find anything obviously being leaked, but I couldn't spend a ton of time on it either.
Yeah, fair enough.
But that just seems super invasive to me. If it means what it says and it's not just your saved ones, if it's actually like you type credentials on and they just go ahead and check if it's been compromised. I'm sure for a lot of users, it's actually going to be kind of a bit of a wake-up call because, I mean, who's going to passwords.google except those who kind of know about it and care about password security and are already aware of breaches and all of that. Whereas this is kind of getting it in your face to the average user. I do think it's actually going to be a benefit. I'm just not sure I like the privacy implications of it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of a similar sense. I was thinking, like, overall, this could help improve people's security who don't, like you were saying, they don't really know how many breaches have really happened that could affect their, like, passwords if they're, like, reusing passwords and stuff like that.
Yeah, and just being aware that it has actually been breached. I mean, for a lot of people, that'll be a wake-up call.
That'll be an alert, yeah. But I mean, like, Google hasn't given people a lot of reasons to trust them with something this sensitive, you know what I mean? Like,
well, I mean, I
don't know.
kind of disagree.
You disagree? Okay.
Well, I'm saying kind of. I think Google has given people reason to trust them, and the last several years have been a constant decline of that goodwill they built up. I mean, there was a time, you know, like that. I more or less agree with you in practice. Just on that one technical detail, I'd point that I think, you know, they had a lot of goodwill back, you know, when their motto was still, you know, do no harm or whatever it was.
Don't be evil or something.
Yeah,
like that.
Yeah, it was something like that. I'm probably, yeah, don't be evil sounds right. Like, you know, back in those days, they built up a good amount of goodwill towards them, and that has been deteriorating.
Yeah, so I mean, overall, this might be useful for people, but personally, I'm not going to use it. Like, I don't even really use Chrome anymore, honestly.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure that it's doing just what you log in with. It does say they're slowly rolling it out. My really quick test, I didn't get any alerts on it. Like I said, though, my credentials, like the password wasn't like, I didn't know any that I could definitely use for it. But it does say you can control it in the Chrome settings under sync and Google services. So maybe this is only related to those that you sync, which is what I really hope it is. But the way it's phrased here gives me some concern.
Okay. So going into something a little bit more controversial that happened during the week was a DMCA by Apple. So Seguza put out a crypto key for SEP, I think it's called. It's basically it's a protection on iOS. I don't know too much about it because I'm not an Apple person, but yeah, it was a key posted, and
Do you know what SEP
Apple
stands for?
let me. I know, like, I've seen what it stands for, but I don't have it off the top of my head. I'm looking it up really quick. Oh, my Google isn't working right now, so let me just go into another one really quick. But basically, while I look that up, it's basically Apple DMCA
Secure Enclave Processor.
Yeah.
So it's their
Secure
secure processor. Okay.
Yeah. So the key was posted, and then Apple DMCA'd to Twitter to take it down, and it got removed. And this kind of, it started a controversy because it is a blatant abuse of IP law. At least, I'm not a lawyer, so maybe
I would
I
disagree.
could be wrong, but I think it's a violation. Like, they're abusing it, and some other stuff happened too, where there were some Reddit posts for, I think it was Checkrain and Uncover jailbreaks. Those were actually taken down off of Reddit, although those were fake DMCAs. It wasn't actually Apple that sent those.
So I'm gonna kind of jump in here and say DMCA is not only about it is about copyright protection, but what's really important to understand is the anti-circumvention laws as part of Title I under DMCA. So while those crypto keys are not copyrightable assets alone, it falls into the same categories like the old was it HD DVD? Was that the first illegal number that I'm thinking of? Are you familiar with the illegal numbers?
No, I'm not.
Okay, so illegal numbers
Maybe
that
I'm too young.
Well, so like the PS3 keys include, PlayStation 3 has a key that's also illegal. Essentially, it's
I remember the PS3 stuff.
It's numbers that are illegal to possess. They're illegal to possess under the DMCA. So yeah, AACS encryption key, which looks like it allowed for the decryption of HD DVDs and Blu-ray discs. So it was that key that got leaked, and under DMCA could be taken down. And I feel like the SEP key is going to fall under that. It's going to fall under the fact that this key can allow for circumventing copyright. So this key itself is the device to circumvent copyright, and thus they can take it down. I don't necessarily. I think there's an argument to be made that the key is used for, or can be used for, circumventing copyright. If the secure enclave is used to enforce, so if like Widevine or whatever is using that secure enclave, then that key would be something used to protect the Widevine, which is the the browser, or the standard browser DRM thing for like videos. So like Netflix, YouTube, they're all using Widevine.
HTTP. Right? Is that what you're thinking of? Or am I thinking
No, you're thinking of the actual HDMI cable.
Oh, I think I know what you're saying now. Are you talking about that program where it compares the audio tracks and stuff and tries to make a match to detect if...
Widevine is literally the library.
Okay, I'm thinking of something else then. I'm
Widevine's just a DRM library. But I mean, if Widevine uses the secure enclave for any of its crypto,
yeah, I was thinking
then violating SEP itself would be, or would allow for that copyright violation. Thus, the key itself can be protected under DMCA.
Okay, I'll be honest. I thought it was more that they were trying to claim the key itself was like their intellectual property and you were distributing it without their permission.
No, it's the fact that it's a device to circumvent the copyright protection, which is made illegal by DMCA, apart from a few exceptions that are in there that allow for reverse engineering and all of that. But DMCA is also about, those anti-circumvention laws, and that's where I think the key can be claimed. Not that they're actually treating it as intellectual property, but they're treating it as the tool that can be used to violate their intellectual property.
Okay, so that's a good point, because honestly, like, I think a lot of people thought along the same lines I did. I don't necessarily agree with it, but at least it does have some sort of legal basis. I will say I'm pretty sure the tweet actually did get restored. I think it went back up. I don't know if like Apple revoked that after all the backlash or whatnot, but I'm pretty sure the tweet did go back up. And of course, even if it was legal for them to do, it was kind of a stupid move. I mean, Apple should know how the internet works. As soon as that happened, dude, people who had screenshots or whatever of the tweet just started tweeting out the key, and then like there was 100 posts about it.
Yeah, the
So,
Streisand
like,
effect.
yeah, that's what it's called. I couldn't remember the name. Like, there's no point in doing that, really. I mean, it's been shown time and time again that that doesn't really work. So,
Yeah, I mean, it's, making a fair effort, though. And I do want to be clear while I'm describing the DMCA stuff. I'm not trying to come on that side. I'm actually really not a fan of DMCA. I think it's overreaching. There's the chilling effects from it. All of that. I just have a lot of familiarity with that because of the work I did with the Metal Gear Online server. And in order to get on the original server, we had to do a DNAS bypass, which was Sony's system. So I ended up talking with a lawyer about, what we could do, what we can't do. And, I've actually talked with a lawyer about some of this, and that's kind of where I'm coming from. I'm not a lawyer. It's just, I have a little bit of experience with it.
that's pretty cool that you can offer that insight, though, because I think that adds something that I haven't really seen mentioned when talking about it. So Rosita, so this was a white paper that came out, and it seems to be basically an automated tool to try to eliminate power analysis leakage in ciphers. So
Yeah, I think this
it
could
seems
be
to work on the
used.
assembly level.
I think this can be used outside of ciphers too. Uh, that said,
Yeah,
yeah. So the high level overview here is one, they make use of Elmo to detect all the leakages.
which have we talked about before? I feel like it
We
sounds
haven't
familiar.
talked about Elmo. We have talked about other means of detecting it. Essentially, Elmo is I'm not sure if I have exactly what it stands for written down in my notes, but basically it'll emulate what the hardware would do. It kind of has a model of the chip. Uh, it's got a particular chip. It's an ARM chip. I should probably have my notes in a better order, but it models a chip and what it expects its power usage to be. So Elmo itself is software based emulation of the hardware to try and detect leakage. And then Rosita, actually, I'm not sure if that's being said right. It's a Sesame Street character, but Elmo and Rosita. So,
Oh, okay, I didn't know
so
that.
if you're familiar with Sesame Street,
Go for a quick
however
guess.
that character's name is said.
Yeah.
Uh, so anyway, high level overview. It's a semi-automatic. Gets those leakages from Elmo, and they've patched Elmo a little bit to help them discover kind of where some of these issues are, where the actual leakages are. Elmo will tell you there's a leak. They've added something to kind of try and detect what a binary or assembly is actually resulting in that. And then basically goes, okay, I know the patch is on like this, the leak is on this instruction, and then has a bunch of essentially just pattern matching that does.
Yeah. So I will say, like, kind of a preface of this paper is if you don't know how or what side channels are and power, like leakage and stuff like that, basically you can observe the state of the CPU when it's doing something sensitive, and this is most often crypto, which is why this paper focuses on ciphers. I think they actually focus, like, they tunnel in on AES in this paper. And you can basically observe information about it, like the temperature, the voltage, electromagnetic emanations, and stuff like that. And you can try to infer what's going on. And they actually, what I thought was really cool about this paper is they actually have a list of some of the things that can leak through those avenues that I talked about earlier. So one thing they say that causes leaks is like overwriting a register. So this is operating on the assembly level. So overwriting a register could leak the Hamming distance between the previous and new value. Overwriting a masked value with another one in memory could leak stuff.
Yeah, so
And
let me
data
actually
going over the memory bus.
let me interrupt you here. I was actually going to
Okay.
go through all of the patches that they have for all of these issues too.
Okay.
So yeah, as you've already kind of mentioned, all of this is around the Hamming distance. So if you're not familiar with what the Hamming distance is, you can think of it like the Hamming distance between bat and cat is 1, because you need to change one of the symbols. So basically between the binary, it's how many digits are actually changed each time. You're able to kind of leak that information. As it's already been mentioned, you can leak that in operand interaction. So that is kind of the interaction between the operands of successive instructions. So if you do a it'll leak kind of the previous held value and the new one. So essentially all it does is inserts a move R7 to R7. So effectively a no-op, but it ends up clearing the bus. It ends up changing the bus there, so the instruction bus itself is no longer leaking that information. And so some that wasn't mentioning it, R7, essentially how this also ends up working is it creates the R, well, it holds off or freezes the R7 register. When you compile the software, nothing can use R7 except for its code, except for the Rosita code. So that's also one of the big performance hits, is that it basically takes away a register. So R7, essentially, it just holds random data. It's used as a mask in a lot of places, as this random value that can be updated, changed, rotated, whatever, as long as it's random compared to all of the normal data. So with this operand one, it just inserts a move R7, R7, no op, but it gets that extra instruction in there, so you don't have anything sensitive being leaked. Spectre was talking about the register reuse. So if you reuse register, say, moving, you put one value into, R3, and then you put another value into R3, you're able to leak that Hamming distance again. Which is just tell you how many bits were changed. So they just move R7 into whatever that register, and then so you do the first move R7 into it, and then do the second move. Again, to kind of clear that out, so the Hamming distance becomes random again between them.
Yeah.
There's leakages through the rotation operations. And I just want to say, this actually is a really good overview of the of these leakages and kind of more information on how they work. I learned a good bit just reading over this paper. I'm not an expert in this area. Anyway, so the other thing, moving on, rotation. Essentially, they talk about 2 possible ways they could do this, but all they do is, and again, with rotation, it's still, it's leaking kind of some of the mask information, which I didn't really want to touch on. It's a particularity of the AES implementation's already defense against the power leakage by using masks already within it. The particular AES implementation was a masked AES implementation. Not super relevant here. I mean, it is, but the rotations can leak part of the mask rather than just I believe it's still Hamming distance out of the mask, but anyway, they just mask the word with that R7 register, do the rotate the mask, unmask the word. So masking is just using like XOR. And finally, with memory operations, you're able to leak it in the memory bus. Again, that Hamming distance. So all they do is if they find it, or they'll do a push and a pop of that register mask. So they write out to memory and read from memory that register or that mask value. Again, kind of randomizing what's on the bus. And to be clear, they only do this where Elmo detects a leak. They're not going through everything, and like every time you do a couple moves to the same register, they're not inserting like these instructions. It's only where they've actually detected a leak via Elmo.
Yeah. So I'll say that I like this paper, and I I thought the section on the leakage sources was particularly interesting. We've
Yeah.
covered papers that talk about side channels and leakage in CPUs before,
Yeah,
and
we've
I don't
covered
recall ever
power
seeing.
leakage before.
Yeah, and I don't recall ever seeing a list that's that that accessible.
Yeah,
Like,
no, absolutely. That's
so
kind of what I was saying a little bit earlier there. It's a really good paper on how it covers these issues and their patches to show why they work. Like, yeah, I like this
yeah,
paper for that. I learned a good bit about myself, those details.
yeah,
That said, I will say when I first read it, and they start off right at the beginning saying there's an 11% performance hit. I thought that was a little bit high. Did you?
11%. I mean,
I mean, it's
is crypto going to be
significant.
used? Is it going to be used enough where that penalty is going to seriously impact performance? Because I guess it depends on how much you're using.
I think it
I don't
definitely
know.
can be. That said, so I thought it was a little bit high, but these patches are light. They're very light patches. Nothing in here is really crazy. Nothing in those patches that I mentioned stands out. So it
Yeah,
seems to me like this is going to be the hit you're taking, regardless. I mean, apart from a completely swapping out the algorithm to change it. It sounds like you're probably going to have that hit anyhow. So this is automatic.
I mean, one thing is that I like this paper tunnels in on AES, and I wish they kind of tested against more than just AES. Maybe tested, some other ciphers, RSA, or even some non-crypto related stuff. It's fair that they don't, because AES is just kind of their like what they use to demonstrate what they're trying to do. But I think
Yeah, a
it would
lot of
have
these
been.
patches I think will apply to other systems. That said, other systems are also going to have, or other algorithms may have, like the data based stuff where it's you're able to leak more information about the data, whereas this masked AES, like these are kind of the threats on it and they're things that they can detect. So I think that's why I got limited to this particular masked AES implementation, just because the masking already kind of takes care of there not being that power analysis on like the data itself. Like there's the data itself, because of the mask, doesn't map to the power usage basically.
Yeah, I guess I just would have wanted a bit more information and testing against more things to kind of see how the performance penalty kind of carried over across other things.
Yeah, that's fair. I just think that other things have other issues that this won't pick up on.
Yeah. So on the 11% being high, I say it's moderate. I don't want to say it's high because I think we've seen like other papers we've covered, they've had performance penalties up to like 20 to
Oh
30%.
yeah, we've
So in terms
seen
of
much
stuff we've
higher.
looked at, yeah, like this is kind of a bit lower than what we've seen, but it is like 11% is worth noting.
But I mean,
Um
if they don't get it down to sub 1%, I mean, if you care about performance, you just can't use it.
yeah, we're performance nuts, so so the next hardware assisted mitigation we have is Camouflage, hardware assisted CFI for the ARM Linux kernel. So CFI, control flow, integrity. So this is basically talking about using PAC or pointer authentication in ARM v8 and applying it to the Linux kernel. Not only on function pointers, but also on pointers to critical structures like operation tables and stuff like that, which I thought was kind of interesting. Um, so basically, one way they proposed doing this, which I thought was interesting, was they were going to use execute only memory that can securely set keys. So you can't read from it, but you can execute it. So the threat model for this mitigation is assuming that the attacker has kernel read write, but they cannot modify write protected memory. So they can't just use one of the control registers or something to disable write protection to write over kernel.txt.
Yeah, and
Actually, I shouldn't
that
say control register because we're talking about ARM, but the ARM equivalent, basically. Sorry, what were you going to say?
I was just going to make mention that the execute only memory that's mentioned there is something that is enforced at kind of a hypervisor level. So
Yeah.
that does kind of limit where we're going to see this.
Yeah. So obviously, because we're talking about kernel, performance is important. But they mentioned that they kind of had a bit of a challenge with getting accurate benchmarks because they used QEMU for testing, and apparently that's not incredibly good for getting performance because it's not. I think they say it's not cycle accurate or something like that. I can't remember exactly. Let me see if I can find it in the paper because I don't want to like misrepresent it. Yeah, they say, however, QEMU is not cycle accurate, and hence it cannot be used for performance evaluation. And they say that they tested against ARM v8.3, which it's pretty new. It's not really available on boards yet publicly, so they had to do some like hacks to kind of get the performance statistics. So that's worth mentioning because they do put some performance things in there because the kernel, like I was saying, it does matter, but they could be less accurate than some papers we've seen in the past. So the way they tested it was they ran it on a Raspberry Pi 3 customized kernel. So through the performance that they got using the PA analog stuff, they said that there was about a 6 nanosecond overhead on function calls, which I thought was interesting that they use nanoseconds. I haven't really seen that used as like a metric, I guess I should say, in previous papers. Usually it's like a percent that they give, but they gave a nanosecond. But what I wonder too is that they only gave the performance metrics on the function calls. They didn't really give it on the data pointer accesses because they mentioned that they don't just protect function pointers, they also protect those file operations tables, stuff like that. I do wonder what the overhead was on that, and I think that is a bit more important. That seems to be kind of missing from it. Maybe it is there, but I didn't see it when I was looking through it. So
That might be some of what they just had problems trying to get performance information on, though, too.
yeah, that could be it.
I mean,
Um,
functions, there are ways of doing that. I'm not, apart from instrumentation, which would then have its own performance impact, I'm not sure how you'd collect it on the data access.
yeah. So I mean, the gist of it is it's basically pack for Linux kernel, which is interesting. I mean, we've seen it being used in iOS for a little while. Android's been lagging behind, so iOS has it, and I mean it works. It's a good mitigation, but my problem with like pack and those types of protections is if you have kernel arbitrary read write, you can just do data only attacks. Like you don't need code execution, especially when you're like iOS is a bit more locked down, so it's a bit of a different story. But when you're talking about Linux, like literally all you need to do is once you have an exploit, you overwrite your task struct to give yourself UID 0. And once your process is root, you can just load kernel modules, and then you have code execution anyway through a legitimate vector. So, I mean, I don't want to say it's a bad thing, but it's fairly easy to get around, at least in Linux kernel, because especially because of those loadable kernel modules. One area I would see, like, I think what they're trying to get at here with making it more practical is trying to get it into something like Android. Android runs Linux kernel and it runs on ARM, and mobile is like a huge target, right? That's where we're seeing a lot of security mitigations and stuff being put into, because journalists and stuff like that, like a lot of nation state attacks that we've seen. One that comes to mind is like Pegasus. They're attacking mobile because a lot of people, have sensitive information on their phone. So I could see this being maybe useful in Android, but Android does support, since Android Oreo, loadable kernel modules. So all it takes is getting root and then using that root to, insert a kernel module or something. So I guess what I'm trying to say in conclusion is basically this is cool, and if it works without a major performance overhead, I think it's worth doing. But it's worth mentioning that it's not going to, kill attacks or anything. Data-only attacks are still very powerful.
Yeah, it's not going to kill them, but at the same time, there are a lot of code reuse attacks. So forcing things to be data-only attacks, or at least initially, like to get that initial foothold on the kernel, that's a significant hindrance too. Like that is a significant class of attacks that you no longer get.
Yeah. I mean, one thing is, like, this focuses on ARM with Linux kernel, and Android is one of the only things I can think of that a lot of people use that actually fits that criteria. Like, servers and stuff like that, they're going to be running x86. And as far as I know, x86 doesn't really have... Well, for now, I don't really see that changing, though, in the near future.
I'm not... Sorry. I'm not entirely convinced that x86 is going to be the future. I'm not convinced that it won't be either, but I don't know. We've seen a lot of ARM improvements. So I don't know. I can imagine this coming out to the server. Not in like the next year, not in the next cycle. Especially because we are seeing a lot of competition now on, Intel AMD with like Epic versus Xeon, on that server side stuff. Like we're not going to see it really soon. But I'm not
timeline
sure.
I was thinking of was like within the next 10 years.
Okay,
like, I don't see ARM replacing x86 in terms of servers and stuff like that within the next 10 years at any like level.
No, I mean, if I were to put it like the earliest I'd put it would be maybe 8 years. That feels like such a specific number though that I really can't defend. I just say like, I don't know, 10 years feels like maybe it'll start by then.
Yeah. But I'm just thinking like right now and within the next like short term, within the next 10 years or so, this is pretty much only going to be really useful on Android, and that's it. So it's cool. I don't want to downplay it, but it's quite limited in where it can be deployed, and it's also not going to stop. Like they say that they include arbitrary read-write in their threat model, and I just don't think they should. I think they should. Well, maybe they should. I don't know. It just seems like they kind of ignore the impact of data-only attacks.
Wouldn't a fair mitigation be to prevent the loading of arbitrary kernel modules? Require signed modules or even just whitelisted modules or something like that, where you can't just start adding your own code and modules that'll get loaded.
I mean, technically, yeah, but
you'll still have attacks in there. But sorry, go on.
Well, we've seen Android kind of take a different direction because I've been doing the Android streams on Fridays, as I've been calling out a little bit on the last few podcasts. And so I'm writing a kernel debugger for Android that works through a kernel module. And while I was looking through that, I discovered that on Android Oreo, they actually forced all manufacturers and stuff like that to enable in the kernel configuration loadable kernel modules. So before that, they actually didn't. A lot of devices didn't allow loadable kernel modules, and then Android 8.0 actually forced them to do that. So it seems like Android's trying to make it so that you can, or I should say Google is trying to make it so that you can, if you have permissions, load kernel modules at runtime. So it seems to kind of go in the opposite direction of like what you were thinking of in terms of a mitigation.
Fair enough. It seems to me like that would be a mitigation, but if Google has some reason that that's not an option, then yeah. Otherwise, I've agreed with you with what you've been saying there. It's just that kind of stood out as well. Why not get rid of that?
Honestly, like I was just about to say, like it would be cool if you could specify that as a device user. Like a lot of people don't need loadable kernel modules. Journalists, stuff like that. If you could enable a mode that's like a more secure mode or something, if you're like a high value target, like a potential high value target, then you probably don't want loadable kernel modules, especially if you're not doing any development stuff with your phone. At the same time, if that's on the phone directly, what enforces that? Because if it's enforced at the kernel level, then you've broken kernel integrity in this threat model.
Yeah,
So,
fair point.
Like, maybe you could do something with trust zone that can enforce that. And if you could, I think that would be a good workaround, is like trying to prevent loadable kernel modules and enforcing a mode set by trust zone, like maybe a boot parameter or something like that. I don't know. But yeah, as it stands, like that only attacks are still, like, even if you don't do code execution, that only attacks are still really powerful, and the stuff in this paper isn't going to prevent that. So yeah, that's my overall conclusion on that paper. I don't know if you had anything to add there.
No, I think you've hit it.
Okay, cool. So next attack is binary planting with the npm CLI. So this was put out, and kind of a weird. So for those who don't know, npm, it's basically, I think it's like it's a package
node
manager,
package
right?
manager.
Yeah, node package manager. So I don't really write Node. I don't really like Node, but one of the reasons I don't like Node is because of how reliant people are on packages. Like, I literally saw packages for, like, is negative, a function to check if a number is negative that has like hundreds of thousands of downloads.
The classic example is left pad.
Left pad? Okay. I saw it as positive, but
yeah, no, I mean, there was an issue specifically involving left pad some years ago. So it's kind of been the one that gets called out. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely that issue. Either way, if you do write Node, if you do use npm or yarn, update. That's the gist of this update. Essentially, what this allowed was basically an entry inside of the like package.json, whatever. If it was installing globally, it would just overwrite any file that already existed in user local bin with the node install. Well, not the node install, but like the package being installed.
yeah.
So I mean, really easy to kind of understand how it would happen. They've mentioned that they didn't find any evidence or any packages that were using it, which is fair evidence that it's probably not getting too widely used, or if it was being used, it was very targeted.
Yeah. So they mentioned, like, they did fix it. They sanitized entries to remove leading slashes and dot entries and stuff like that. So I mean, it seems like an issue, but like you said, they did scan packages and stuff, and it didn't seem like any is using it, which, I trust that. And at the same time, if, like, it seems like there's probably, if you can get a target to install your package, you can probably just put a backdoor in the package directly. Like,
yeah, I mean, that would give you some persistence, though.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, I was just thinking, like, there's probably other ways.
No, you are right.
For
like,
somebody to hit you if they wanted to, other than using this bug.
Yeah, like, this would be used, I would imagine, more like you would backdoor bash. So even after they've uninstalled your library or your tool, it's still, you've got your persistence there with the bash being backdoored. But yeah, I mean, at that point, though, you're already executing attacker-controlled code.
Yeah, like, you already have some level of trust in the package author already.
Hopefully.
Hopefully, when you're using that package. I mean, honestly, I probably shouldn't say that, because, like, a lot of Node.js projects I see, they use like 1 billion packages and they don't give a shit. They just import all of them, which is, why I was saying earlier that I don't really like Node.js. But I did find it interesting that it's like, it's a pretty low hanging fruit issue. So I'm kind of surprised that it took this long to find.
Yeah, I mean, it just takes somebody kind of looking at it, and I feel like there are other places that you might look at with this before looking for something essentially that dumb.
Yeah, like, it seems kind of too dumb where you're like, nah, there's no way that's actually a thing. But
and as we've already kind of said, the practical use of that is limited. There are definitely uses for it. It's not like it's totally useless, but if they're already installing a package, if you've already got that level, as you've said, I've said, there's already some code execution that's going to exist there.
Yeah. but still worth updating, obviously, if you're using that. So let's hit the elephant in the week that happened, which was the PlunderVolt, another named attack. So the PlunderVolt paper came out. So the title is Software-Based Fault Injection Attacks Against Intel SGX. So my initial thoughts on this paper is, when I glanced over it, it's basically focused on glitching, right? That's essentially what they're doing. They're doing software-based glitching.
Yeah, I mean, glitching is fault injection.
Yeah, and I mean, at first I was like, okay, but we've known that glitching is an issue forever. Like, that's not really anything new. If you mess with the voltage or something like that of a CPU, it's gonna cause issues when it goes to execute instructions. So, and my other problem with the paper is that you need a lot of access to pull this off, because the way this works is through MSRs. So they use two of them. They use Hex 198, which is called IA32 perf status, and they use Hex 150, which I don't think they have a name for. But to be able to write into read and write into MSRs, you need ring 0 access. You can't do that from userland. So in order to pull this attack off, you already need an exploit chain that gets you to kernel, which is a pretty high conditional. So at first,
but definitely not impossible.
Not impossible. But my first thoughts were kind of like, okay, like, you're basically just saying that glitching is bad and you can pull it off from kernel. That being said, I think it is a little bit interesting, just because a lot of like fault injection attacks you see are based from hardware. So software based, even with kernel, it is a little bit easier to pull off than with hardware, because
I'd say it's a lot easier to pull off, because malware can pull this off. Malware can pull off the hardware attack.
Yeah.
Now, so, that said, what's the benefit of malware extracting the AES key?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too, right? One thing that... So I did have a bit of a conversation with some other people in the reverse engineering Discord about this. And one thing that I didn't think of was like signing keys, or like verification keys and stuff like that are in SGX.
Yeah.
So, you might not want encryption keys, but you might be interested in the signing stuff. So
yeah, well, we talked about another issue which targeted the signing stuff not too long ago.
Yeah.
I want to say like maybe 3 or 4 episodes ago. That said, before we kind of go too far kind of on the meta with this, I do want to talk about the actual issues that they found, which is mostly that the IMUL instruction could be faulted. So they go into a decent amount of detail into kind of the types of attacks they use. So essentially, what was interesting, they do talk through their process and reasoning to actually reach being able to leak the sensitive data, from okay, we can corrupt a multiply, to okay, we can corrupt the Chinese remainder theorem calculation in RSA, which is an optimization. It's kind of like this running tally calculation that's used to cut out a lot of work with calculating RSA. I forget exactly how much work it cuts out, but it's basically just a trick for that. Takes a little while, so it's really easy to calculate. And basically, if you get a faulty ciphertext that they call Y prime, and if you have the correct output, if you have both of those, you can calculate the private key based off of a faulty value and the successful value, as long as you were able to interrupt the CRT in essentially the key locations, which are pretty easy to hit, because like I said, it's kind of for this running calculation. It's not just a single shot. So they do that for the AES keys, and they use another attack, the Lenstra attack, to basically remove the need to have the correct key. So just from the corrupted value, they're able to calculate your private key. And then they talk about doing differential fault analysis, which is how they leak the AES keys, which is basically the fault in the AES calculation would always be a single bit flip. So given a pair of faulty and correct ciphertexts on the same plain text, they could recover slowly that AES key in 2 to the 32 plus 256 encryption attempts on average. So just kind of giving a few of the details about what they actually did here in terms of those leaks. I like the fact they covered a lot of their reasoning, how they worked up to getting to using like those particular attacks. And they linked to the paper on the Belcorn Lentra attacks if you're actually interested in that, which is just about the RSA, Chinese Remainder Theorem, faulting. And they managed to fault other things that are a little bit less useful, so various like memory safety related faults like allocation sizes or indexing. They're able to fault some of the key derivation to expose like the long-term key material, MAC calculation. Like they have some other faults in there, but the big things are the RSA and the AES key leakage. So yeah, now we can talk about the meta of how this is actually useful.
I mean, overall, it's kind of weird because this paper absolutely falls within the threat model of SGX, because they mention that SGX is supposed to be secure even if the kernel is compromised, and in this case, a compromised kernel could, lead to you hitting SGX successfully. I just don't really understand that threat model, because from what I understand about Intel SGX, it's basically trying to protect secrets from isolated processes. But if somebody has kernel access, like, they can already hit those processes anyway. So I don't really know what, like...
Well, no, SGX is trying to, basically, like, a lot of things protected in there are trying to keep, like, even the kernel from being able to access these values.
I get that with, like, the actual keys themselves, but what you're going to be doing with those keys is already compromised at kernel level. So it's kind of weird. Like, I understand why kernel is in their threat model, that it could be compromised, but at the same time...
But if you get the keys, you can use that elsewhere. You can do that without the SGX. You can calculate the signature for... so one of the uses with the signatures is actually connecting to VPNs to validate the hardware that's there. They'll use the signature calculations for that. So they'll know what the appropriate certificate is. So now if you've got that key to do the signing yourself, hey, I've got this totally trustworthy laptop that's completely legitimate, and I'm going to connect to the VPN using, let's use Joe's certificate that we leaked. Like there's kind of that aspect where you can do a lot of things somewhere else off of that computer once you're able to extract that key. Or any of the keys. That's the one that comes to mind. I'm sure there's more. I'm sure you would like to be able to extract the key off of, the PS4 or something. Obviously, I don't think they're using Intel SGX, but like that idea, I think still applies. I don't know what the Xbox is doing, but there might be something related there, for example. Basically, these keys do have a use, and if they're leaked, anybody could use them for anything, rather than being kind of restricted to just what's exposed over SGX.
See, I had that thought in my mind, thinking about, like, the PS4 and trying to get keys for that. When reading this paper, to try to, like, bring the practicality of it, keep it in my mind when I was reading it. But, like, consoles are kind of a specific case. Like...
but I mean, there's a lot of restricted...
as much DRM as consoles.
Not as much DRM, but you do have other restricted devices. There are a ton of devices that run, like, embedded Windows. Little, like, devices that, like, time-stamping devices that will, like, you'd basically check in to work at one of them.
But how many of those devices are using SGX? Like,
I don't know the numbers on that. I just mean, like, it's definitely part of the SGX threat model, and there are these use cases that do apply.
Yeah, I'm fine. Like, I can agree to that.
I mean, the laptop and the signing thing is definitely common, kind of at the enterprise level.
Yeah,
like having that sort of hardware validation.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely use cases for it, like you're highlighting. It's just that, like, I don't think many things use SGX, so it just kind of seems like the news around it probably should have been more recognizing of that, because obviously, you know, whenever any of these name vulnerabilities go out, there's
Oh
a
no,
bunch of like
so
news outlets that cover it and stuff like that, but like this attack is very unlikely to hit. Like I very much doubt that there's even a handful of like cases where this attack would be
so no,
viable,
again,
so they
I
would
kind
actually
of
want to use.
I want to mention Widevine though. I mean, most, you know, if you use Netflix, you're using Widevine. Widevine uses SGX if you've got it. And if you don't have it, or you don't have any alternative, I'm not sure what alternatives Widevine actually supports. But if you don't have any alternative, you just can't stream in like the 4K from Netflix. Like there's several levels of Widevine. I'm pretty sure at least at the top level, I believe SGX would be used for that.
Okay, that's cool. I actually didn't know that like SGX was used by that.
So, I mean, I feel like that's, you know, that piracy aspect is there. I mean, obviously people are pirating other ways too, but I think SGX is used more than we might realize.
Yeah, I could maybe see that. I guess it's just the impact is pretty limited, and the paper itself doesn't really do anything too novel. It's basically just pulling off.
I think the fact that it's
glitching
software is absolutely huge.
The fact that you can pull it off from software is cool, but it is ultimately just a glitching attack, and glitching attacks have been happening for years. It's nothing really new.
But glitching attacks from software,
yes. But it's just the impact is limited too. So that was my overall thoughts on it.
I don't know. I mean, I think it's more valuable than you're giving it credit for. Just because it is software, there are plenty of local privilege escalations to go from user to kernel. I mean, it's not like that's a rare occurrence on most machines. So I don't know. I think it's definitely something that is novel. They bring something new where it's, you know, essentially like you could in theory have something that goes from browser to SGX with this. And SGX is generally considered, well, I don't actually know how secure it's considered. It's not really an area I've looked at, so I won't say generally considered secure, but
that is its purpose.
The fact that this goes from there is, I think, a big thing.
Okay. Fair enough. So, talking about exploits, and actually we were talking about, you know, privilege escalating to kernel, we actually have another wide open BSD issue. So this is an LPE through OpenBSD's dynamic loader. So CVE 2019-19726. And so this was an issue in the dynamic loader, and it's so
it's a cool attack. I like it.
You like it? Okay. So the issue seemed to be that you can set a very small rlimit data resource limit, and you can cause it to run out of memory. And then because of that, this function DL split path, it basically fails and it returns null. And because of the way they use it, they can basically, the end goal is the attacker can execute their own library code as root.
So let me try and
highlighted the issue here.
Let me try and describe that a little bit more.
Okay.
As already mentioned, this is the essential goal here is you're able to load your own libraries in as root. So what ends up happening, Spectre already kind of mentioned, the core issue is you set the low R limit and you create a really large LD library path environment variable. So that's here in the code where it reads, kind of gets the environment, LD library path. So you essentially set that up so it contains a single dot and a bunch of colons. Basically, the only path that's going to get loaded, hopefully, is the single dot or your present working directory, which presumably the attacker will control the contents of it. If you don't control it, just CD somewhere you do control. So from that, you set the low R limit data, so your resource limit to basically say, yeah, you don't let it allocate more. So when you have this library path that's larger than what its default buffer can store, it'll try and reallocate a new buffer. That reallocation will fail. So what ends up happening here is, as already mentioned, it returns null. But then you'll notice down here, if DL trust, and this is like change password and I forget the other binary, but they talk about change password through the write-up, so we'll use that. So obviously it's a SEHUED binary, I mean it's going to run as root. So if it's that, it usually will zap the path of anything that was loaded there. It's just going to free the library path that it loads, which makes sense. They don't want to let you do this, but because what it then goes, so when it returns null, it basically goes if dl path, that's going to be null, so it just doesn't free that because it thinks there's nothing there. So when later on it goes and actually executes the password make db, or sorry, it'll sorry, in main. So this all happens before main of change password. In main of change password, it'll do the SEHUED. And it'll do SEHUED, setting it to 0, and it'll change that R limit to infinity. And then it does an exev, loading up the pwd make db, loads that up. So now it's loaded that up with an R limit that isn't restricted, and it says root. And it didn't zap the library path from the environment because there was none, or so it thought. So when it does that exev, it goes through that same process, except this time it loads that path correctly because it can access all the memory that it needs. I don't know. I think that's cool. That's kind of how it gets the shared library. And there is that difference between how it reads the libraries before and after that R limit set. Or basically before and after the SEHUED. That difference is where this vulnerability gets introduced. I think it's cool because it's a really logical attack. It's not super technical.
Yeah, it's a lot of the issues you see will be like classic memory corruption type stuff, and this isn't that. This is, like you said, it's more of a logic issue, which they're typically more subtle and you don't see them as often. So yeah, I'd agree with you. This seems like a pretty cool attack. I will say, I don't know if it was just me, I found this page was written kind of weird. It took a lot of jumping around for me to figure out what the issue actually was.
Yeah, I had to jump back and look at the code and then jump down to kind of see exactly, but I didn't think better. Yeah, that's fair.
Itself. Yeah, but the attack.
You'd say that about most papers.
Cool. Well, I mean, I don't know. I just honestly, I went and looked at the actual CVE, and I had to use that as kind of like a preface to actually understand exactly what they were talking about. So
okay, I didn't have that much of an issue with it, but
okay.
I mean, fair enough. Like, it's not the most clear. Like, the style of writing here just does jump around a bit.
Yeah. Apparently they fixed this issue in like less than 3 hours, so props to that. But it's not been a good past few weeks for OpenBSD, man. They've been getting it tough. People have been hitting them a lot. So if you're, I mean, I'll say it again. I think I said it the last episode when we covered OpenBSD. At least OpenBSD, I don't see a lot of people really using it. So it's funny that it's like a lot of people are hitting it. I wonder if somebody went looking for this issue and found it because of the previous OpenBSD reports. Because like previous to the last couple of weeks, you don't really see a whole lot hitting OpenBSD. Like, it's not really something that a lot of people look at, really, because it's not really used too much.
No, so, I mean, that said, some of the places that's used are kind of higher security. So
yeah, I mean, it does have higher security angle to it. Like, that is like their core stance. So I can definitely, I can agree to that. So
yeah, I don't really have much more to say there. So
yeah. So next thing is AirDoS, remotely render any nearby iPhone or iPad unusable. Sorry, were you going to say something?
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say it's another named vulnerability.
Pretty good though. I mean,
it's
pretty good name.
Good name. It's disappointing that it's used for this one because this isn't all that interesting of a bug. And I mean, essentially all this bug is if you try and airdrop a file to somebody, it gives you that little prompt on screen. You can kind of see the video here. gives you that little prompt where you can approve or decline the airdrop. So you just basically spam airdropping or write it in a script that'll automatically keep sending those airdrop attempts, and you basically have no time to actually use your device because it keeps showing you that prompt. That's it.
And obviously, like, it requires a close proximity because it's, you know, it's through
Yeah.
the airdrop stuff. This seems like more of a prank attack, honestly, like something you'd pull on like your little brother or something if you had the capability to do it. Like, it's more of a prank
Yeah,
attack.
for sure.
So, you know, it's kind of fun. I will say I am surprised that Apple never considered this as like an edge case that like somebody might do this. Like, obviously the way they fix this is they just rate limited it. So after 3 attempts, all the subsequent prompts are automatically denied in the background. I am surprised that they never thought that somebody would like think of that. Usually Apple's kind of on top of that stuff, so
I don't know if they just never thought, or it came up and had like this low sev ticket.
yeah.
And it just, nobody ever really bothered because it was such a low risk issue.
Yeah. So if you can't update to iOS 13.3 and fear that a family member may try to pull a fast one on you with this one or something, the way he recommends to prevent it is just disable AirDrop. So, I mean, you know, only use it when you need it, kind of thing. But yeah, not really practical, more of a prank attack, but still fun.
And it's a named
cool
phone,
name.
so we had
It's
to
a named
cover
vault,
it.
so we had to cover it. Exactly. Yeah. Something that was more interesting though was the F-Secure Labs post on digital lockpicking, stealing keys to the kingdom. So I thought this was a cool attack. So it talks about a lock called the KeyWe Smart Lock. So it's a digital smart lock. It can be unlocked with a key or like an NFC, like an armband or a card, or an application through mobile. So they did some tinkering with it, pulled it apart. They have some pictures of the hardware and stuff here, and they discovered that it used Bluetooth Smart or Bluetooth Low Energy (BLE). So you know they went poking around, and I think they tunneled in on the Android application is what they really focused on, and they discovered that so it uses AES to encrypt the messages that go back and forth. So you know when you use the mobile app to like unlock the unlock the lock, it'll send a message to the lock, and the lock will send one back. So you know obviously you want those messages encrypted because somebody could just intercept it and do like a replay attack or something like that. So they have an in-house key exchange to allow the Android app and the lock to work. And you can already see like in-house key exchange. That's probably already a bit of a red flag that that's where the issue is. So the numbers used for calculating the key pair are exchanged, and they're encrypted with a common key. But the problem is the common key only changes with the device address, and only 2 bytes end up changing. So let me just scroll down to where that is. Or do you have it up? I'm just trying to... Oh, is this a different thing you opened up? Oh, yeah, okay. So in the post, they show an example of the key, and how only 2 bytes change by the address. So you can very easily calculate the common key, or even just brute force using that device's address. So this is kind of like a master key. You can kind of like crack all existing KeyWe locks with it. And they mentioned that you can get the traffic by using a sniffer. There's sniffers for Bluetooth Low Energy. What I liked about it is this attack seems very much like a Tiger Team style attack. That's what I was thinking of. Like this could be something that could be used in like an escape room type thing. It'd be a really cool attack for something like that. I don't know. What were your thoughts on it, Z?
Yeah, I mean, basically you get the keys, you're able to deal with anybody using the lock. It breaks the lock, it breaks the purpose of the lock.
Yeah.
I mean, so you could use that anywhere that you're dealing with physical assessments, and they happen to be using this. That said, in terms of the key itself was based on the device of the Bluetooth Mac. Like the actual Mac device address is where the common key came from. The 2 bytes that changed were actually kind of their attempt at making an IV. 2 bytes changed with all the messages, just the first 2 bytes. That was
okay,
kind of
thanks for correcting
their
me.
attempt at making like a, because they didn't use an initialization vector. That was kind of their attempt to keep every message unique. So
Okay, so
I
I
guess
had
it
it
went.
added a bit backwards. My bad. Yeah.
Yeah, at least I believe so. I was trying to find exactly where you're talking about in the document so I can confirm that. But I do know that they use a random 2 bytes, not as a key, but just as being kind of like that initial value, so that every encryption is different. It's never encrypting the same data twice, even if it's sending the same message. But yeah, essentially the common key though could still be broken. Like I said, it's based on the device ID, which is publicly visible to everybody. It's basically broadcast. Um, and then the key generation itself, after they both kind of given their as part of the key exchange, the whole logic to that is right in the mobile application, so you can easily reverse it. And that's kind of how everything's broken.
Yeah. So it's worth mentioning that this lock doesn't have a firmware update functionality, so any existing locks that people have bought are going to be vulnerable to this issue. The only way to really they're going to fix it in future models. But but they haven't fixed it yet even. So
Yeah, they did mention that future models will also have an update ability, but that hasn't been released yet.
yeah. So if you're using this lock, time to change locks, I guess.
I mean that really is just the mistake right at the beginning, not having that sort of not having any sort of update facility or mechanism.
Yeah, it is a bit surprising because most things do nowadays, but oh well. I guess the moral of the story is don't use in-house crypto. It never works out well when you try to do it yourself.
Avoid Internet of Things.
Yeah. So there was another really cool write-up that came out this week, and it was SockPuppet by Ned Williamson. So it was a walkthrough of a kernel exploit for iOS. So Ned Williamson's he does some really cool stuff. He's been really tunneling in on fuzzer stuff. If that name sounds familiar, it's because he actually was involved with the 3DS hacking stuff. He did a lot of the 3DS. I think he did the audio exploit for 3DS. And he's also in PPP, or at least he was. I'm not sure if he is anymore. I think he is. But yeah, he's been tunneling in on kernel exploitation stuff and fuzzing. And he talks about an issue that he actually found on iOS 12.4 with that fuzzer. And it's a UAF in the kernel. So this is I really recommend you read this for yourself, but I'm going to do a brief explanation of how it works because it is really cool. So it's in the network stack, and there's this function that they have in the kernel called in6p or in6 PCB detach. So this function is called basically whenever you like disconnect and reconnect to a socket. So they have a structure that contains various options, and then obviously on cleanup they try to free that. And there's actually 2 options fields. They have in6 options, which I'll highlight here. Let me just bring it down on the stream. And then they also have the output options. So they kind of free them in different ways. The options, they check if it's not null, and then if it is, they free it. The other thing they do for the output options is they actually have a function that handles it, which is IP6 free PCB ops. So that function internally will free it, but the problem is it doesn't actually null the field afterwards like the other options one does. And because of that, it's obviously use after free because the reference is still there. And the reason it can't do that is because this function, the IP6 free PCB ops, it doesn't know where INP points to. So it can't null out that field after it frees it because the pointer is passed directly through argument. So, when that function is called, you basically have UAF, and because of where it is on the get sock ops and set sock ops typically uses that a lot, you can fairly easily get an arbitrary read as well as a constrained write. So he talks about trying to use that to go to like a more powerful primitive, because in iOS and stuff like that, I'm not an Apple guy, but it seems like the kind of end game of exploits in that area is through something called mock ports. I think I'm saying that right. So basically, X and U it's composed of like two halves. He kind of mentions there's like the BSD stuff, and then there's the Mac stuff. So Mac is all like Apple specific stuff, and these ports are really powerful. They basically allow you to do like arbitrary read write, and like I think there's a few other things you can do with them, but they're like really powerful primitives. So when you exploit, you typically want to get to that as like your end goal. So he kind of talks about how he took this bug and the UAF and kind of went to that mock port primitive. So it's really interesting. I don't think the article really goes into getting code execution, because when you're talking about like iOS and stuff like that, you have pointer authentication like we were talking about earlier. And unlike Linux, iOS and stuff like that is more locked down. It's not as easy to, you can't just load your own kernel module, right? Even if you're root. Root isn't the highest privilege level in chain of trust in iOS. So he kind of stops at the read write, but he talks about some issues he had, like the write was constrained, and he talks about how he had to kind of work through that and use the fuzzer to work around that, and eventually found a way you can actually arbitrarily free a pointer. So yeah, it's kind of cool. Like, what I really liked about the write-up is he includes some of the struggles that he had and some of the ways he got around those, which you don't always see in write-ups. Sometimes people read the write-ups or see the exploits and they think it's like magic. But, you know, it's cool that he included the ways that he figured out around some walls he hit when he was exploiting.
I definitely kind of appreciate the showing of that struggle. Because it is a common issue where people kind of, you read these write-offs so often and it's just, you know, I ran into this issue, so I did this and used this attack, and then I did this and used this technique, and then when I ran into this, I did this. And it sounds like, you know, it's a 5-minute process. Whereas in reality, I mean, people are probably spending days, if not weeks on some of these issues. And there is that struggle that is there. I mean, I like kind of that quote, you know, frustration is part of vulnerability research, and you need to embrace it accordingly. You know, that frustration's always going to be there, and like more often than not, it's more you run into some wall that you're banging your head against, and you mention to a friend like, hey, I've got this issue, and they're like, oh yeah, read this paper, and they just know the answer. But it's kind of that community, that group effort that really helps out. Obviously, some people work solo, whatever, but you know, it's in doing that research where a lot of things get learned and where a lot of that struggle is, and it just doesn't make it into the write-up because it adds so much content, basically. But yeah, I appreciate seeing it.
Yeah, I will say one thing about this article is you do need a little bit of background in like Apple, because like Apple stuff, because there's a lot of like lingo and stuff surrounding iOS that's different from everything else because of Apple. So, you know, you'll see terms that are used like Mac ports, for example. If you're not familiar with like previous exploits in iOS stuff, it's kind of hard to grasp the concept of like what they even are and how they work and stuff like that. So there is a bit of a barrier to entry of reading it that you will probably need to do some additional research to find out what they're talking about, because it is a really long article. I don't blame them for not like explaining every like, you know, iOS specific concept as like a background before getting into it, because that, I don't think that'd be reasonable. But you know, because it is Apple and iOS, you might need to do a little bit of background research before you can fully understand the write-up. So I just wanted to throw that out there for anybody who is looking at wanting to read it.
Yeah, I mean, if they did add all that background, would you want to read it though too? Then it just becomes so long.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, knowing your audience, I guess.
Yeah. So another video that was posted was talking similar about why I liked the SockPuppet write-up. This was a video by Maddie Stone titled What's Up with Whatsup, a detailed walkthrough of reverse engineering CVE 2019-3568. So this was another cool video that didn't really focus on the end goal of getting the exploit working, but it focuses more on the process. So she talks a little bit more about like what tools and stuff you could use and how to know what tools to use to try to understand bugs once they're kind of already out there.
Yeah, well, I mean, on the tool side, it was mostly, the patch diffing. She did a comparison between a few different patch diffing options. Then talk a little bit about the static analysis and dynamic analysis using Frida. Showed kind of like the quick little Frida script she ended up writing in it to figure out where this code was being called from. But yeah, it's a walkthrough of kind of that reverse engineering process. I guess Maddie Stone, before joining Project Zero, was working more on, I believe she mentions that she's working on the malware side, like malware reversing side at Google for like Android stuff.
Okay,
not so
I
much the
didn't know that.
vulnerability. Yeah, she mentions, I believe that. I mean, watch the video. It comes up pretty early on. I believe that's what she said.
Yeah, I skipped a little bit past the introduction to try to get to more of the points, so I probably missed that. That's cool though. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I guess at this point, like, she had been with Project Zero just for a couple months.
Okay.
So she's new to the team. But yeah, I mean, it's really just a look the reversing process, going from, the checkpoint and Facebook kind of announcements about it and the couple little details we had there. And we talked about those little details actually on our episode when this first came out. But then going from that and actually, doing some of the diffing, finding some of those or correlating some of the details that were mentioned by checkpoint, and basically working it out to, here's likely-ish where the exploit, like, she doesn't go into exploiting the actual issue. Like, you do still get a lot of details. I think it's a really good presentation. Even if you're not necessarily doing like patch diffing or anything, it's just good to kind of know the workflow and the process of that. And because, she admitted kind of being new to at least some, obviously, she's not just new to everything or anything. I mean, she is on Project Zero, but, she included some of that struggle, again, that we talked about with the SockPuppet write-up. You got to see that, and I think that's where so much of the learning really happens for any of us who just want to watch it, is seeing those struggles, because odds are, when you go and approach that, you're going to have the same issues.
Yeah, I mean, you could have 50 years of experience in this stuff and still, like, hit walls and learn things later on. Like, it's kind of crazy. Like, it doesn't matter how much experience you have, you're going to encounter some of the issues that she talks about in the video. So,
I will say,
I think it's awesome.
I was a little bit surprised that the radar or RDIF it didn't actually turn off anything worthwhile. I mean, I know I'm not a huge fan of it. I don't think you are either, of like radar 2 in general, but
no.
She basically found, classic bin diff, kind of returned the appropriate results and highlighted the important results.
Yeah.
She only really looked at 3, technically 4, but one of them is basically just sad faces on the across the board because it only ran on Windows and she wasn't going to run. So she has 4 included, but technically really just looks at 3 different bin diffing options.
But it's cool to get insight into, some of those processes and stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I haven't done really any of that. I think you've done a little bit of reversing an exploit.
Yeah, I mean, I had a bit more information to work with. Probably the toughest one for me that I learned the most from was actually a WebKit bug that Loki Hart reported. And I had to kind of, figure out the POC, spin up my Mac and, debug the POC and stuff like that, and it took a while. Like, it probably took a good 2 or 3 days.
You had a POC though to work from.
I did have a POC. There have been other issues that I didn't have as much information, but that one was probably like the one I learned the most from.
Okay.
But yeah, like, that process is really fun. Going from not having a lot of details to getting like an exploit going. That can be quite a cool feeling. And, you can talk about it more and stuff like that, because it's not a 0 day, so you don't have to worry about, like, disclosure and stuff like that. So
yeah, one thing I will say
to learn from
is that's actually, I think, a good way of learning some of the exploit development if you do have a proof of concept to kind of work from. I think that's actually good ways to go and re-implement that, or just know kind of where it started. Get rid of all the other code, write your own exploit, like, figure all that out yourself. but you kind of knowing the exploits there. So yeah, if you have a proof of concept, and I've done that a bunch, just you like that is one way to kind of get up to speed or just learn the exploit development techniques, is to just do it. And the way of kind of cheating to do it without needing to always find ODAs to do it is by using those existing vulnerabilities. That said, I haven't done like the bin diffing here too much. I've used it in a couple places, but not with like a known vulnerability like this. So yeah, it's an interesting video. I mean, I think we can go ahead.
I was just gonna add on with bin diffing. Like, the only thing with me is I like focusing on kernel, and between different kernel builds, like there can be quite a lot of stuff that changes that isn't interesting. So I think when you start working with larger code bases, bin diffing starts to become less viable, because you end up getting way more changes that, like, that haystack kind of grows. Where you're looking at the needle.
Mean, so she had mentioned it though, even with this, like that was one of the things where bin diff, knew at least a few things to kind of go and ignore, like little offset changes or something like that, and only highlight what mattered. And that was one of the things that she was actually looking at with the different bin diffing options. That said, one of the biggest places that I've actually used bin diffing is the reason why I've kind of been a bit worried about saying I've done it but not really is because I've used it with .NET and Java classes and .NET binaries. So, at the bytecode, definitely different looking at that. Higher level assembly, or however you want to call it with the bytecode. Very different. Or a lot more information can be gleaned from it, I guess.
Yeah. So we'll move on from that to the client-side vulnerabilities in commercial VPNs. So this paper talks about looking at protocols that are used on popular VPN clients, and how some of them you can abuse, like, their configuration settings and stuff like that to, like, I think some of the things they mention is like disable encryption entirely, or do some other various things.
I've got the list here of the actual issues. The one you mentioned, optional encryption, that's using a point-to-pointer like PBTP, which generally speaking you shouldn't be using it anyhow. It's just not considered secure for other reasons. That said, and actually, I don't think a lot of people realize this. A VPN does not have to be encrypted. There's no requirement that there's encryption on a VPN. So with PBTP, you can have the optional encryption. And so, if you do that, somebody can pretty easily impersonate the server. That said, this is mostly just on the user's configuration. It's not something, the server can enforce.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm mixed about some of these results. Just because some of these issues are things where it's like, well, the VPN should be informing the users of how to do the configuration correctly. Some of them are things that the VPN could do something about, like the using a pre-shared key to authenticate, which is kind of like this big long list of checkbox or Xboxes where just a Viper VPN gets the checkbox for it. Everybody else is using a pre-shared key for L2TP connections. That's some of the other things they have, like ignoring certificate verification failures with SSTP. Again, that one actually is basically the client, the SSTP client on Ubuntu, just ignores certificate verification settings and ignores the failures. Windows client is correct. I don't know, like, what they expect a VPN to do about this, besides just not offer SSTP, which is probably the better thing. But I don't know what they can really expect. I mean, granted, these are all client-side vulnerabilities, so they've got a bit of leeway. Other vulnerability there, IKEv2, unspecified server name, which basically that actually does come down to the VPN providing a configuration for strong swan. So by default on Windows, using IKEv2 will be fine, but strong swan is the option on Linux. So they give you insecure configuration, which basically says, accept any certificate. So that one, okay, if they're providing the settings and it's a bad setting, that's an issue. That's on the VPN. OpenVPN credential leakage. It's a tough one. Well, it's not necessarily a tough one to solve, but essentially what that's talking about is a lot of these VPNs, obviously a lot use OpenVPN, and they will have like their own UI wrapper that needs to start up the OpenVPN service. So when it does that, it needs to get the password in there somehow. How does it do that? How does it pass in the password without making it like, pop up a shell for you to type your password into, which isn't too user-friendly. And I mean, some users might even be a little bit freaked out by that, and kind of just takes away from, they'll have this nice polished UI, but you have to go into your password into this black terminal. So basically you write it into the config file. I wish they would have differentiated on which did what, but some of them will write it to the config file. Some of the VPNs may delete that config file after the connection's been established.
Which is probably one of the better ways to handle it.
But both of those options are considered wrong. So they don't indicate which ones did which. It's just if they did either of those, they got an X. So I kind of wish, because at least deleting it's something, but there is still that time frame, and if you know about the issue, like, it's still going to be stolen just by waiting for that file. Pull for the file every second until you get it.
Yeah. So they say their goal. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's not a really strong protection there, but I do wish I knew which ones kind of had thought about it. The other attacks come down. Again, there's another no server verification with soft ether. I already talked about that pre-shared key. That actually happens twice. Also with Cisco, anything that offered Cisco IPsec did a pre-shared key. And then just the fallback option. So it tries to connect to OpenVPN, fails, so it tries another protocol, does a fallback to like L2P with the pre-shared key. And you can see basically no provider got everything. As far as I can tell, there's no provider that had
actually wait, I think there was,
or was there one?
I feel like there was one, IVPN, but that was just because they didn't support a lot of other protocols. They had 2 check marks. And
to be fair, though, they do have the OpenVPN, though, which is your most popular, is what most people are going to be using.
Yeah.
So to be fair, that's good for them then.
Yeah.
That's it. Go ahead.
So to highlight the goal of the paper, so their goal with this paper was they see a lot of stuff targeting the crypto level and the binary level. They wanted to show that there were issues at higher levels like configuration stuff. So like you were saying, a lot of them got X's. It seemed the worst one in the chart was what was it? I think Hide My Ass was probably the most popular one that had a lot of issues. In fact, they don't have any checks.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I think Hide Me is called out in the paper itself a few times.
Okay. Another popular one in the chart is NordVPN, but they did pretty well. I think they only had one.
Well, they have one X and one check.
Yeah, 1X and 1 check. So yeah, they proposed some solutions like SSTP. I think they needed to fix something in the library code. They suggested you were saying they should tell users not to use that protocol or whatever. I mean, like you said, I think it's interesting to see these stats all laid out like this. That's pretty cool. But the proposed solutions are just try to inform the user to make better decisions on their configuration.
Yeah, I think the strong swan thing is a very serious issue. If they're providing a configuration that is just simply wrong, the key thing there is that they use for that server ID value, just accept any. It's just completely wrong to do that, to just accept any certificate there. That is an issue that I'd care about, even though it's client side, even though, they should be informed about it, or the user should be there. If they're getting the config from the provider should be taking those necessary steps to secure that connection in that config. They shouldn't be taking those shortcuts.
Yeah, there should be secure defaults. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're coming up on Christmas time, and with Christmas time, of course, comes toys. So there was a post by NCC Group that focused on a technical review of connected toy security. So they did a security assessment on children's toys, so like karaoke machines, walkie-talkies, stuff like that.
Yeah, and a lot of the actual details of what issues the toys had were actually posted elsewhere by, I guess, witch.co.uk actually hired NCC Group to do this analysis, to do this investigation. So they talk about all the specific issues, whereas the NCC Group paper is kind of more of an overview.
Yeah. So they mentioned some of the most commonly found issues were like plain text logins, no encryption. One other issue they mentioned... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I kind of took issue a bit with the issues that they talked about in some of the cases, because it's like, oh, they talk about like, oh, well, the connected forms have, whatever issue. It's like, okay, that's not the Internet of Things. That, like, I read this title, I'm expecting the connected toy security.
Yeah.
Frankly, I don't care if the support forms or if the forms that somebody might sign up for, and let's be honest, I'm sure there are a lot of users that do, but I think like the total percent that actually would sign up on something like that is very low. I don't know, I felt like they just looked at the wrong area with that, which could just be because they didn't have issues. It does sound like this was kind of a multidiscipline team, like they talked about reviewing the privacy policies and stuff also. That said, why don't we run down really quickly the issues that were found, like that are reported on the Witch.co UK. Which is, I'll start off here. Karaoke microphone. Essentially, this is a Bluetooth speaker. No authentication on pairing, so anybody within like Bluetooth range can go ahead and play whatever audio they want to the kid. So their attack scenario is, a predator telling the kid to come outside for some candy.
Well, the thing I found weird was they mentioned that it's actually one-way audio. So they say that that's a concern, but they also kind of contradict that and say that, well, that shouldn't really be possible, but it could happen. Like, it's kind of weird how they word it.
Well, no, from the, like, anybody can play any audio they want through that. They can't hear the kid send anything back to them, but they can tell the kid to come outside.
Oh, okay.
Because basically all the audio that this thing plays is basically streamed off the phone.
Okay. That makes more sense.
Yeah, so basically anybody can play anything through that. They've got this VTech Kitty Gear walkie-talkies. This one, they claim about using encrypted digital communication, which honestly surprises me for a little radio set actually using crypto. And they found that it does use crypto. And the issue here is there's no real authentication on who it pairs with. Just that both, like, I don't think they actually say how the pairing works, but it sounds like it's essentially like, you push a pairing button on one, you push a pairing button on the other, and they pair. So somebody else who's there when it's starting on or turning on, if they're kind of present and within range and know when it's turning on, can kind of get into that pairing session and pair with your kid, even though it might not be who they want to pair with. I feel like it's kind of a lower risk, but I thought it was interesting that they're using AES encryption. And the range of this is like 200 meters, so like it's not Wi-Fi. It's legitimately using, I presume, radio to do some AES encryption there. So I don't know, it just surprised me that it wasn't a more plain data format. The actual issue, though, definitely hard to know when a kid's going to turn on the device. Looks like, both devices have to start pairing within a 30-second window.
Yeah.
Getting to one of the problems that they bring up that I kind of take a little bit of issue with is this Bloxels, build your own video game. This actually seems kind of cool.
I thought it was cool too. I was like, I'm not a kid, but like this seems kind of cool, man.
Yeah, so you get this like 13 by 13 board. You put in your little colors there. If you're watching, you kind of see the pixels that are set up in there, and then the app kind of reads that data and creates like this little 2D level based on it of just like that scene that you can like jump around in or whatever, which is kind of cool. Their issue is that there isn't much content filtering. No real security issue, just like, oh, well, you can write swears in that 13 by 13 box, and then you can share these things to other people. I mean, it's a fair point for a kid's thing, but
it's not a security issue.
Yeah, and that, I feel like it comes down to the difference between what they're actually looking for with some of these. But yeah, like, it's not a security issue in my mind. When I read about the security of connected toys, I'm not thinking about, oh, well, there is no content filtering.
It seems kind of like padding. Like they wanted to add more and they just kind of had to stretch it.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
It kind of seems like that. I mean, yeah, no, that's basically what it seems like to me. I don't want to say that's necessarily what happened. Like I said, it did seem like this multidisciplinary group, like those people that were looking at the privacy policy and stuff. So, like, I can understand why these issues were detected and brought up. Another one is another basically Bluetooth unauthenticated, except it's a little robot, so can't really
killer robots. Skynet is real.
Yeah, I guess the only thing is they do mention that on the companion online platform, there's a speak function that allows you to add text to be spoken out to other users. I feel like, so when I first read this, I thought, oh, well, you know, maybe it's actually like doing some text-to-speech thing. But they phrase this, I think, just right to make it seem like that, but without actually saying that. They say spoken out to other users. This very well might just be like, you know, you're on a website, you can announce a message out to everybody else that's kind of on that online platform too. That's not actually speaking or doing any audio. I don't know for sure. It's just, I don't know. The way it's phrased here just seems a little bit sketchy to me. It's definitely reading into it. I think what they're trying to imply with this is that it is spoken.
Yeah. The other thing that I'm not sure if this article touches on it, but the one I had open before is that they state that toys could be used as like a second order attack to hit more interesting devices like IoT stuff or like, you know, smart home tech and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's actually mentioned kind of at the end of this.
Okay. There's
more. So there's another robot again. You can control the robot. This one, their big complaint though is that on the website where online accounts can be created, they have a weak password system. And that's a fair issue to report on a web application, that like if they allow you to set your password to A, like, while I'm not a fan of like, you know, those password requirements, there are certain requirements that should be there. You shouldn't be able to set you shouldn't be able to like set a blank password, for example. So I don't know what the bar was on this one where they call weak and easy to hack, but that just seemed like it's not really all that related to the connected toy. And then they end with this Rismo, which had no problem because it wasn't connected. So connected toy, but no connection.
One of the other issues that I did forget to talk about that they mentioned that I had an issue with was they said username email enumeration, that you could use like account creation and password recovery mechanisms to see if a username or email was already registered as like an oracle. I thought I had an issue with that because I don't really see like,
that's something I've reported on, actually. Like, I report on that when I test an application. It's usually something that companies are willing to be okay with. But it is a breach. It is kind of letting people know, okay, this email has been registered here. Letting people know that versus just saying, like, invalid credentials. No, I agree. It's a low risk, and in a lot of cases, it's actually completely fine. Like, it's basically one of those low-hanging fruit issues that, you know, I'm doing an assessment, I fill it out because, I mean, it is a potential issue. Clients should be made aware of it so they can make that decision too allow or ignore it, but just be aware that there are issues with that can arise. But it's not like, high severity, 9.8 CVSS, like everything's going to burn because of it. But it is a little privacy issue. It does let you know who's registered and stuff. Like, there are those things. Again, in this particular case, I feel like it should have really been out of scope for talking about connected toys.
Well, I mean, my problem is if you're talking about an account creation wizard, you're gonna need to know if an email is already registered. Like, there's no way around that. That's gonna, of course, like they're gonna need to say if an email is registered or not when you're trying to register with an email. Like, it seems like it's just thrown in there to like more padding. You know what I mean? But yeah, the other thing I was going to talk about that I kind of jumped the gun on was, the second order attacks on hitting smart home tech, and I think that's a real stretch. I just don't see it.
I don't know. I mean, really. That's actually something, maybe not with the kids' toys in particular, but second order attacks are always kind of an interesting.
Yeah, just area. Not with kids' toys, really. Like,
I mean, if you, their example there, I'm pretty sure they give the example of, imagine the kid has that karaoke machine, and throughout the house they have, some Google Home or whatever device, and they have smart locks. They're a very connected family, and you know this, so you're going to break in. So you use the Bluetooth to connect to that karaoke device and say, "Hey Google, unlock all the doors." Sorry if that actually unlocked any doors for anybody. But I mean, some of those, if they don't do the voice authentication, there's room to actually kind of attack that, to use that in some sort of very targeted attack. I don't think anybody's really going to be driving around. Like, there's very few people that would have that perfect storm of devices around.
Yeah. I mean, what that attack that you kind of laid out kind of reminds me of like that Burger King commercial a while ago where they had like I think it was Alexa. They did like, "Hey Alexa, show me where the nearest Burger King is," or something, and it would actually read it from the TV's audio. So that is an attack that I didn't really consider. So, fair enough.
Yeah, but that's definitely happened with radio before too.
Oh, has it with radio too? Yeah, I'm not surprised.
Well, so yeah. I think there was something like, I want to say phones were like shut down or something because of one of them. Like I know people who are using their phones as like a GPS device had their phones turned off while they were navigating because of a radio ad. I don't remember the details of it, but I remember that as like the big thing about it.
Oh, I didn't hear about that one, but yeah,
it was some years ago.
Yeah,
definitely.
So we do have a last minute shout out that you wanted to do with interactive buffer overflow exploitation.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of call it. This is a cool little site. Well, it's a blog actually. Basically just an interactive buffer overflow tutorial.
So it has a little JavaScript thing where you can change register values and
so you can step through what they set. I don't think you can actually change the values at this point.
Oh, I thought you could change.
But you can step through and run the code, reset, and kind of see how the values change and work through more complicated things that actually have like an output and a stack. You'll see it show like the stack over on there. Like, definitely useful to kind of get an idea there. You actually do have to provide your input. Like, so if you're learning, this seems kind of cool. It seems neat. Seems like it might help. There is actually a ROP version of it too.
Oh, neat.
Which was from last year. Actually, I remember seeing this last year with the ROP one. It was before we did the podcast. It was December 17th, 2018.
Oh, okay.
Basically exactly a year ago. But yeah, covers ROP a bit.
I was just about to say, like, I don't know if I've seen a blog post that uses like these embedded little JavaScript things to this effectively.
Yeah, I really like it.
It was done a year ago, so okay, I guess I was wrong.
This code is or the emulator is on GitHub, which is kind of cool if you want to contribute to something. Well, I like the commits here recently. There's fuck you JavaScript, an array with 1 int is not a fucking number, and there is suck my dick JavaScript. Where if you look at those commits, it's basically just some JavaScript thing where, trying to detect when it's just that single number and convert the integer to a single array. And failing once and then trying it again. I don't know.
I'm okay with boarding that. Yeah.
I mean, nothing wrong with the commits. Honestly, I mean, a lot of people make commits like that, so fair enough. It is interesting, though. I want to call it out just because it is, like, this emulator, I think, is really cool to be able to embed that, to show it. It's useful to be able to walk through assembly when you're trying to learn about this stuff.
Especially in the context of a blog post. That's really cool to, like, demonstrate stuff. It's better than a picture or a graphic. It kind of takes it to the next level of, like, cool things to have to explain your points. Yeah,
so I can't, I haven't worked through either of these tutorials, so I can't really say, like, it's great tutorial and, like, give it a shining star recommendation. But the fact that it has this interactive thing, it's probably pretty good. Or at the very least, just running through those instructions, if you're trying to learn, is going to help. Like, at the very least, that is useful.
I will say, like, I probably need to look at, like, the license and stuff of usage, like, terms of usage, but I might even try using something like this in future blog posts that we do on the Day Zero blog, like write-ups and stuff like that. I think this would be really cool to do if possible. Doesn't have anything about the license.
I feel like I did read something about the license though somewhere.
Okay.
So just as an aside, we've talked about using this before.
Have we?
Yeah, when I first saw this a year ago, I mentioned it for what we were working on back then.
Oh, my memory doesn't.
So I'm pretty sure. Yeah, so I'm pretty sure the license would have allowed it. I just don't know where I'm seeing the license anymore.
Okay. Which, that is a fair point worth mentioning, though. Like, it doesn't seem like the GitHub has a license, and technically, if it doesn't have a license, you're technically not supposed to use it, legally speaking. That is
correct.
So, maybe we should open up an issue or something on the repo asking for a license. Just to, clear that up.
Or figure out if there is something about a license somewhere that we're just not seeing.
Yeah. Looks really cool, though. I will try to look into maybe using it for future blog posts. But yeah, that is all the topics for today. So, we will be taking a hiatus for about 2 weeks or so. So the 23rd we won't be on, and the 30th we won't be on. And that also applies to my Friday streams as well. Yeah, the Friday streams as well. I'll be doing the one this week, but this week will be the last one that I'm doing the stream for that. So we will be back on the 6th of January. Yeah, we will be back on the 6th of January with the Day Zero podcast, and then the Android streams will be continuing then as well. But yeah, I think that pretty much sums up everything. I don't know if you have any last-minute additions. Want to wish everyone a Merry Christmas or something?
Nope. But no Merry Christmas, no Happy Christmas.
It's very mean.
Well, I'll see you guys in the new year, though.
Yeah, see you guys then.